Today, we talk Redux. Why even have Redux, or how to decide, and when do you introduce it to your project? These questions are better answered if we first have a discussion on state management and really what state management means for your application. So, in a word, state management only means what is happening inside the application, or more specifically, what is happening to the data inside the application. In other words, what is the state of the data as it sits in memory? This isn't specific to web applications or even JavaScript. A lot of state management right now is being talked about with Redux and Redux query and all these sort of things. They're getting talked about in specifically with web applications, but they also apply to just about any application that you could write. So desktop applications, really old mainframe code. Um, Maybe I'll share a little bit more on that one day. This could also be mobile applications, yes, of course, web apps, or really even the little bitty console applications that you could write to do small little scripts and stuff like that on the desktop or on various types of computers. This is simply just state. So when we step back from Redux and we talk about state as if it's just the state of data inside the application, we begin to get a little bit better grip of what we're actually talking about, and it can begin to give us a better foundation for how to reason about Redux and kind of move some of the gray areas away and remove some of the noise. So now we have this concept of a store that is embedded inside of Redux, and so a Redux store. So what is this? Really what the Redux store is this is just the place where all of the data that we're going to manage, the state that we're going to manage, that's where this data lives inside the Redux store. So really, what is this? What would be inside of our store? What data would this be? Well, think of what you would store inside of an application. This could be the username, this could be an age, this could be anything about the user, a profile color, anything like that. As simple or as complex as this is all becoming the data that the application has to manage just to continue running. We haven't even really talked about any advanced features yet either. So that let's say that this is beginning to become a bit more complex. You're adding more features to your application, and now instead of just a few key value combinations inside of this data, now you want to make this it's growing more complex. And so you begin to say like, hey, I want to track some things about, say, the view mode of the application, but also a user profile. Well, because we're writing this in JavaScript, and because this data is essentially just JSON, what it means is that all of this, our Redux store, is really just one giant JSON object. So we can have nested objects, but all of this comes together to be our application store. Okay, so enough theory talk about what state is and state management and how the Redux has a store. You're saying, hey, Darren, I've tried this before. I tried to pull a Redux into my project. It's crazy complex. I don't want to deal with that complexity. I really only need a couple of features in my application. Why would I practically need this? So let's say that we have something very simple. This could be just a very basic user submission form. Think of this as a login form. We see this so often, we don't think that there's really anything special to this. But keep in mind that React likes to break things apart, and you want to follow that design scheme of breaking things down into logical components. So we have a login component, the form component, cancel button, and a submit button. Seems pretty straightforward. This is a pretty good logical breakdown of what this type of UI may begin to look like. So we have the form data that we need to keep track of, and this form data is going to have updates that kind of go within itself. You might type into a form and you just want to continue to update that text field. And then we also have the surrounding login component, and we have the submit button. And so we're going to need our actions that we're taking inside of this form in order to communicate across all of these pieces together. So our form data is going to have to be submitted or sent to the submit button, because the submit button is what we actually click when we want to send something to the server. So the submit button is going to somehow have to take the form data and trigger that something is being sent to the server. So We have the form data going to the submit button, and then that is going to trigger the login component to then contact the server with our data. The server is going to respond back to the login component just because the server is responding back to the application. And then the login component now needs to respond back to the form data to update what's happened. Did you successfully log in? Was the password incorrect? Was there anything else that happened? So this is an example of how a really simple component or a really simple UI that is found in almost any web application, even the most basic ones, can quickly become rather complex when you're trying to break things down into its logical components and trying to break down how the data should flow. And keep in mind that React has a one-way data flow, so things might be a little bit easier is sort of easier if we were able to essentially have two-way data flow between some components. But then, especially with three components like this, things can quickly get out of whack if we're sitting here going, there's two-way communication between the login component and the form, but there's one-way communication between the submit button and the login form, or the submit button is going here but not going there. These things can get really complex really quickly. So, in a nutshell, keeping track of our data, or that state management, and organizing the component behavior, or that one-way data flow that React is designed around, those are the two key reasons that we would want to use Redux. If you've never thought of your application or tried to design it in such a way, it might be surprising just how quickly a need for such a library pops up. So with that said, this is the beginning of a series on Redux fundamentals, and there's going to be more to come on actions and reducers and even how to get data back into the store so that you can reuse it in other parts of your application. I hope this helped knock down some of those barriers to understanding state management and why you would need this inside of an application. If you have any questions, please feel free to leave them down in the comments below. And other than that, thanks for watching.